I couldn't take a vacation because I had to take care of my sick mother. So, when my mom DDD, my husband ignored all of my calls and took his friend on a trip to our dream resort. Nick, my husband, and I have been together for 4 wonderful years. He's a great partner. We chose early on not to have kids together, so our relationship has always been about the two of us. We've never thought twice about that choice because we were both happy with it. There are many good things about our life together. We love being free from having to worry about raising kids because it gives us freedom and flexibility. Every year on our wedding anniversary, I'd like to plan a fun event to remember our time together. It's become habit for us to look forward to a time when we can both forget about our busy lives and focus on each other. Nick has always liked it when I surprise him with little trips or thoughtful activities that show how much I value our relationship. For our 5th wedding anniversary this year, it was brave of me to book a week at an all-inclusive vacation for us. As soon as we heard about this vacation near our city, we knew we had to go there. We have been working hard, so I wanted to treat us to a week of pampering and rest where we could just be with each other and not think about anything. It looked like this was the best way to get our relationship going again. Before setting up this day, I talked to Nick, and he seemed really excited about taking a break from work. It was too bad that my mother wasn't feeling well at the moment. She was paralyzed from the waist down after a terrible car crash more than 15 years ago. It completely changed both her life and ours in ways we could never have imagined. I became very interested in taking care of her since I was still living with my parents. My dad had to work extra hours or long hours to pay for my mom's hospital bills because he was our only source of income. Even though he was tired when he got home, he would help my mom in any way he could. We made it through as a family, even though none of us found it easy. Things got harder after I went to college, though. Because he was the only one who had to care for her, I could tell my dad was hurting. I felt terrible about being away from home at that time. I really wanted to help, but because I was in college, I couldn't be there for all of them. Nobody ever said anything bad about my dad, but I could tell he was stressed every time I saw him. He loved and cared for my mother very much, but I could tell he needed help because taking care of someone all the time is hard. Since this was the case, one of the first things I did when I got my first job after college was to offer to hire a full-time caretaker to help my dad out. But I thought it would give him a break and let him relax and take care of himself. I knew it. Wouldn't be the same as having my dad or me there for her, though. My dad was very grateful when I made the offer, and I could see the relief in his eyes. I was glad I could do something good for both of my parents. It made me feel better to know that they would get the help they needed, and that my dad wouldn't have to do everything by himself. But my mom's health was getting worse. She was having trouble breathing even with oxygen because she had started to have breathing problems. She had lost a lot of muscle tone in her upper body over the years, making it hard for her to move her wheelchair by herself. Not only is her physical health getting worse, but her mental health is also getting worse very quickly. My mother was always busy and in charge of everything and everyone when I was a kid. Was very depressed and very angry that she couldn't move around much. One night, my dad called me in a panic. He told me that my mom had started having scary dreams that woke her up and made her scream. She kept telling him that she was going to die soon. When I heard him say those words, my heart almost stopped. I was afraid for her safety and didn't want to see her suffer, even though I knew she wasn't feeling well. My last visit to them was about a month or 2 ago. It was mostly because of how busy my job was. Without giving it much thought, I told my dad I would drive over to their place in the morning. At that time, the most important thing was to be there for both of them, and I knew they needed me. But when I told my husband I was going to stay with my parents for a few days to take care of my mom, he didn't like it. Nick wasn't really into family. My husband Nick had a much harder youth than I did, even though I was lucky to have a family that loved and supported me. My husband grew up in a home where his parents clearly liked his sister more than me, who they thought was the coolest kid. Nick, on the other hand, was often forgotten and not cared about. It was terrible to learn that the people who were supposed to take care of him the most had ignored him for a lot of his life. He finally accepted this fact, but it hurt him a lot. Because they lived so far away, Nick's family didn't try to come see us very often. His family never got together, not even for Christmas. Nick wasn't attached to his family because he was emotionally and physically apart from them. The truth was that he and his sister had been fighting for years and hardly ever talked to each other. I told Nick right away how close I was to my family when we first started going out together. I told him that they were very important to me and that I tried to visit them as often as I could, even though it took 3 to 4 hours. Nick first seemed to be okay with it. He would even go on these trips with me, which made me feel like he was part of my family. No one liked Nick more than my dad. He treated him like a son. As they laughed and talked about football while drinking beer, it was great to see them connect like they had known each other for years. They were both really into the game. But something changed over time. Nick finally stopped going with me on these occasions when he started to grow apart from them. Because he wasn't used to spending a lot of time with family, it was clear that he was tired of seeing my parents over time, even though he never said it straight. I started making up reasons for him not being there as it became harder and harder to get him to go on those trips with me. My dad liked being around Nick, so every time I went to see him, he would sometimes ask about him. His voice had a hint of worry to it. I wouldn't tell my dad the truth about Nick's desire to stop spending time with him and his mother because I didn't have the courage to do so. Instead, I would act like Nick was busy with something important. It was clear to me that Nick's past had affected him in ways I couldn't quite understand. So I tried my best to understand. Nick didn't like going to see my parents, so I cut back a lot on my trips. This time, though, it was different. My parents made me do it, so I got ready to visit them. When I got to their house, I had a lot of different emotions, from happiness to worry that had been building up in the back of my mind. Even though my dad had told me over the phone about my mom's health problems, nothing could have prepared me for seeing her in real life. When I saw her, my heart broke. It was clear that her health had gotten worse more than my dad had said. She looked much thinner and more weak than I remembered. She looked like a shadow of the strong, active woman who raised me, and her hair, which used to be full and shiny, starts to fall out. It hurt to see her like this. I pushed those feelings aside, though, because I knew I had to be there for her and my dad, who had been working hard to take care of her by himself, so that my dad could take a much-needed break. I cooked for everyone over the next few days. To bring some comfort and normalcy back into our home, I made sure to cook some of his favorite meals because I remembered how much he loved the ones my mom used to make for him. For me, seeing my dad enjoy those meals made the world a better place. That meant having a quiet moment with my dad after dinner or sitting next to my mom and having a quiet conversation with her. I tried to spend as much time as I could with both of them. I knew that my presence made a difference, even though I couldn't change what was going on. After things had cooled down, I would call Nick at night to see how he was doing. I told him about my dad's health, my mom's health, and my worries about her. Nick, on the other hand, didn't seem to care or understand. When I told him that my mom's health was getting worse, he often told me that I was making him worried about my family problems and that he wanted to relax after work. I tried to convince myself that he was probably just tired from a long day at work and didn't have the energy to participate more. But it made me feel a little bad inside. The scary thing is that my mom's illness got worse right before our anniversary. I wanted him to understand how serious things were getting and offer some comfort. She started throwing up bile and blood, and it was hard for her to stay hydrated and sleep at night. At night, I would listen to the radio with her for hours to help her calm down. It was awful to see her go through this. The doctor gave her medicine to help with her symptoms when we went to see him, but it was clear that things were getting worse. I told him with a heavy heart that I was thinking twice about going on vacation and asked when I would be driving back home so we could start getting ready for our trip. I said I wasn't sure if it was time for me to leave my mom because her health was getting worse quickly. Nick didn't like what you said. He got mad at me and told me he needed to spend time with me too. He also said that my mom wouldn't die from the week-long trip. He went on to tell me that he felt alone and that I often put my disabled mother before him. What he said had a big effect on me, and I felt terrible about what I did. We were very close because I was his wife, so he was partly right. He needed me just as much as my parents did, so I could see why he was sad. Of course, I was scared to leave my sick mother in the meantime. I was afraid that something terrible would happen while I was gone, and I knew I could never forgive myself if it did. My heart was full of guilt and worry when I got back home. How could I relax and have fun? But I didn't want to fight with Nick. I tried to make him feel better by telling him that I would be home in 2 days, which would let us go on our planned holiday. When I finally got the nerve to tell my mom that I had to leave in a day or two to go see my husband, she begged me to stay. I had never heard her voice shake so much because she was scared and open. She told me over and over that she thought something was wrong with her and that she was scared of losing me. I felt scared when I heard that. That included my dad, who has always been the quiet one. He looked pretty worried. The fear in his eyes made me realize that they both needed me more than ever. At that point, I knew what I had to do. This time with my mom was important, and I couldn't get it back, but I could always go on a trip with my husband later. In the evening, I told Nick the news. I told him very clearly that the trip was off the table and that I would be staying with my parents instead. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I hoped he would get it. When my mother asked me to stay, he yelled at me and called her selfish. He told me I would be sorry for my choice and that I was making a big mistake. As I tried to reason with him, I begged him to understand. I promised him that if his parents ever needed help, I would always put their well-being ahead of a holiday. In the same way that I had to help my mom now, I would have been with him the whole time and helped him. Nick wasn't ready to understand though, no matter how hard I tried to explain. He kept telling me that I was wasting our holiday money for no reason. I felt terrible seeing him like this, so angry and unable to understand my point of view. I felt in my heart, though, that it was right to be with my mother. Even though I really wanted Nick to understand how important my choice was, I had to accept that he might not, at least not right now. But Nick made things worse between us by asking me not to cancel the bookings. After telling me this, he said he was going to the lodge by himself. My heart broke as I heard what he said. He seemed confused when I asked him if he was sure he would be okay spending a week by himself at the resort we had chosen for our anniversary. I thought that maybe he hadn't really thought about it and was just venting his frustration. But he told me that he wouldn't be by himself because he was going to bring Bella, a female friend, with him. My mind was racing as I tried to understand what he was saying. To give you some history, he had only known Bella for 2 years and she worked for him. She was 7 years younger than he was, even though I knew they were close. I had never been worried about their relationship. I had always been able to see how close Nick was to her. Even when I saw them laughing together and telling each other inside jokes at work events, their relationship never scared me. It didn't occur to me until I learned that Bella called herself Nick's business wife. I thought it was just a passing crush, like the pointless flirting that happens at work. On the other hand, I never thought Nick would ask Bella to go on a trip with him to celebrate our wedding anniversary. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After that, Nick told me that he wouldn't waste his holiday time because I wasn't going with him. He took a friend on a trip that was supposed to be for us, and it was rude for him to do so with someone who worked for him. Nick said that he couldn't do anything else because I was leaving him. He told her that he was sure Bella would be there for him when he needed a break from work. His words hit me like a ton of rocks. It looked like he was punishing me for doing what I thought was right. The man I married was great. The man I loved told me these things. It was no longer just about the trip, it was about our friendship and the promise we made to always be there for each other. What had happened between us that he would rather go on vacation with a friend than help me get through one of the hardest times in my life? I couldn't sleep because I was afraid of what might happen to us. I learned about the main issues in my marriage. The fact that Nick chose to go on this trip with Bella showed that there was something seriously wrong between us, not just that he was mad. The next day I yelled back at Nick when he told me to call the hotel and change the ticket so that Bella instead of me was included. I told him that he should make these changes on his own if he was serious about following through with the plan. I wouldn't help him get rid of me from our plans. After we talked, I texted him all the information about the reservation. I then broke down in tears because I felt so beaten. Oh, I guess I was louder than I thought. My dad came to check on me while I was crying. He told me that I could go home if I needed to and asked me in a soft voice if everything was okay. He would take care of Mom. I told him I wanted to stay and shook my head while I was still crying. If Nick was really carrying out this plan, why should I go back? It was unbearable to think about going back to a home where I was clearly not valued and where my husband had chosen someone else over me. Everything that I had worked so hard to build in my life seemed to be falling apart. Nick and Bella did get to the lodge in the end. He was so bold that he put a lot of pictures of them hiking, drinking, and watching the sunset together on the internet while they were at the lodge. I felt sick when I saw pictures of him and her smiling together. That's not how we were supposed to spend our date. Family and cousins who follow Nick on social media and saw the pictures of him with this woman quickly sent me texts asking about our relationship. Even though they really cared, it only made me feel worse about myself. What I was going through in private seemed to have been brought out into the open for everyone to see. It was totally confusing, embarrassing, and made me feel sick. It was clear that Nick was making fun of me on purpose. I did everything I could to convince myself that Nick and Bella were probably just relaxing and enjoying their vacation, and that nothing bad was happening between them. But I knew in my heart that Nick's behaviors were wrong in many ways, no matter how hard I tried to explain them. It was more than just the chance of having a sexual meeting. It was all the lying and being clearly evil. He was mad at me for not going with him, and he didn't care about our marriage. It broke my heart to learn that the person I had given my life to could be so cruel and angry. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, life dealt me the worst blow. When my mother died in the middle of the night, it had been 3 days since Nick left for our trip with Bella. I was still getting over the betrayal. When my dad found her in the morning, the sound of his sad sobs woke me up like a bad dream. I jumped up quickly to see what was going on, and when I saw her, she was still and still. She had been through enough pain, and the only thing that made me feel better at that point was knowing that she had died quietly while she was sleeping. It was like a part of me had died with her. My dad was able to get himself together enough to call for an ambulance and start making plans for the funeral. During this whole thing, I felt numb and disconnected from the real world. Being in so much pain made it impossible for me to think or do anything else. I have no idea how he did that. The only thing that came to mind was calling Nick. I couldn't wait to hear his voice and find comfort in the man who was supposed to be my husband for life. I called him while I was crying, hoping he would answer and be there for me during this very hard time. He didn't answer though. Not once. I called and left messages for him several times, pleading with him to answer my calls because they were important. But there was nothing. There. Nothing. He didn't even answer the phone when I needed him the most. When my mother died, my family and friends came together to help me. At the funeral, they were there for me and loved me, but I wasn't really aware of what was going on. I remember lying on my mom's bed in her room for hours on end, not being able to move or see outside. Even though my dad was grieving in his own way, I was too sad to go check on him. My mom was gone, and she was not coming back. Even though I was going through a lot of pain and loss, I kept telling myself that I had made the right choice by being with my mother in her last days. I was grateful that the universe had brought us together. I can't even imagine how bad I would have felt if I had really left her to go on honeymoon. When I finally got the nerve to look up Nick on social media because he hadn't returned my phone, my worst fears came true. While I was still upset about the death of my mother, Nick sent me more pictures of him and Bella having fun at the resort. He never took the time to check on me. I could tell right away from those pictures how little he cared about me. It hurt my heart even more than it was already hurt. Even though everything was terrible, my mother's death and my husband's betrayal, something changed inside me as I lay in her bed, remembering how much she loved and taught me. My mom was always there for me and taught me to love myself, be proud of who I was, and never settle for less than what I earned. When I had that thought, I knew I could never look at Nick the same way again. Because of how he had been acting the last few days, I no longer knew him or respected him. I knew I didn't want to spend my whole life getting in trouble for the choices I made and having them doubted all the time. I also didn't trust him anymore, and I didn't want to keep thinking about whether he had slept with Bella. Those things were not important anymore. For me, it was important that the guy I thought I knew wasn't there. He had spent our 5th wedding anniversary drinking with someone else while I was sad about my mother's death. The next day, I drove back to our house with a heavy heart but a strong will. I carefully picked out my things as I went from room to room, making sure to pack anything that was important to me. I was going to go before Nick got back from his trip with Bella. It was too much for me to think about confronting him and hearing to what he had to say. I told him to enjoy his life with his work wife in a message because I was done with him, and I quickly left. When I drove back to my parents' house, I felt both sad and determined. I felt strong for the first time in days, even though my heart was heavy from losing someone. I was reclaiming my life, even if it meant starting over. Nick had already made his choice, so I was making mine. Nick must have found out that my things were gone when he got home. that he was shocked when he read my message and saw that I had packed up everything and left while he was gone. He called me right away, and the phone kept ringing, as if a few words could suddenly make things better. It was known to me that my cousins had called him, sending angry texts about how he had hurt me by going on vacation with a friend while my mother was dying. He texted me several times to say he didn't know he should have been there for me, but wasn't. He has begged me many times to call him again. Now, it looks like Nick is only saying sorry because he is finally having to deal with the results of his crime. But where was this fear when I needed him? When I called him in tears and heartbreak, he didn't say a word. Where was his regret? I can see now that his regret comes more from the criticism he's getting than from a real understanding of how much pain he's caused. My husband wasted our 5th wedding anniversary with a friend, so Ida broke up with him. Update 1: to be clear, I didn't want to talk to my husband before I left him because there was nothing else to talk about. I no longer trust him. He did this to hurt and punish me, not because he was having an affair with Bello. Okay, that's it. Is there something else you want to say? Some of you are right, that I'm acting on impulse and because of how I feel. But how many of your husbands blogged about seeing their coworkers on their wedding anniversary while you were still sad about your mother's death? For what reason should I spend the rest of my life with someone who doesn't value or care about me? Second news. I'm grateful to everyone who has reached me since my last post to offer support. I did talk to my dad about it and tell him everything. He knew what I wanted to know about whether or not leaving my marriage was the right thing to do. Because he loves Nick as much as he loves me, I knew he would not be afraid to tell me when I was wrong. Even though my dad agreed that Nick's actions were wrong, he also told me to talk to my husband and find out the truth. My dad wants me to know the truth because he thinks Nick has been having an affair with Bella and wants me to be able to move on. So I finally called Nick and asked to have one last meeting. Third update: to sum up, everyone was right about Nick, even my dad. There was an affair between him and Bella. He told me during our conversation that he had grown close to her over the years, even though they had never met in person. He basically told me I ignored him all the time and didn't put him first, even after we got married. In response, I reminded him of how often we went on dates, how many meals I cooked for him, how we talked about our lives in the evenings, how I did his laundry exactly the way he liked it, how I cleaned the house, even when I was tired from work because he didn't like it being messy, and how I even bought him expensive gifts, whereas he would only give her awful, careless gifts in return. I asked them how I could have been mean to their friend when I wasn't having an affair with her. Nick didn't answer my question. It was clear to him that taking Bella on the trip was just a joke and meant to make me feel bad. I didn't believe him when he said they never did anything together. He begged me to forgive him and almost cried when he said he was sorry he missed my mom's funeral, but I didn't even blink. There isn't enough time in life to stay married to someone this weak and stupid. I'm going ahead with the planned divorces. We don't have kids, so this will be easy.